Segregation. It caused some of the greatest conflict in U.S. history. It lasted for more than a century, and the compromises leading to its end are arguably still taking place today. One of the biggest conflicts caused by segregation was related to discrimination in schools. There were many court cases surrounding the idea of allowing black children to go to public schools with white children. The Brown v. Board of Education case, decided in 1954, was a major first step in ending discrimination in public schools for good, but it was also a major first step in ending segregation completely. The Brown case made it all the way to the United States Supreme Court. It was argued for the plaintiffs by a future Supreme Court Justice, Thurgood Marshall. He later became the first African American to serve on the U.S. Supreme Court. Following the end of the American Civil War, 3 amendments were made to the U.S. Constitution, all related to the end of slavery and granting freed slaves the rights of citizens. The 14th Amendment guaranteed all citizens of the United States equal rights, due process, and equal protection under the law. The first court case to reach the U.S. Supreme Court concerning these rights was the Plessy v. Ferguson case, also called the Plessy decision. A man named Homer Plessy was 1/8 African American and 7/8 white. He was sitting in the white section of a train in New Orleans and was asked to move to the black section so an all-white man could sit there. Plessy refused to move and was arrested for his action. He argued that separating blacks from whites on trains violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. He took his argument to court, and it made it all the way to the Supreme Court in 1896. The court ruled by an 8-1 vote that Plessy's rights had not been violated because he was offered a seat equal to the one he had been denied. This decision allowed for Jim Crow laws and the idea of separate but equal throughout the segregated South. After the Plessy decision, many more black people filed lawsuits fighting Jim Crow laws, arguing that their treatment was unfair. Many cases were concerning racial discrimination in schools. An organization was formed to fight for racial equality in 1909 called the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, or the NAACP. In the 1930s, this organization began to focus on segregation in schools by forming the Legal Defense and Education Fund. Many of the cases they fought were concerning blacks wanting to go to colleges, but they couldn't because they were for white people only. One court case concerning blacks wanting to go to white colleges was the Murray v. Maryland case of 1936. Thurgood Marshall had been rejected from attending law school at the University of Maryland in 1933, but he didn't argue or take the university to court. He then attended Georgetown University and got his law degree. Later, while working for the NAACP's Legal Defense and Education Fund, he challenged the university and fought for a man named Donald Gaines Murray, who was in the same situation as Marshall had been. At the Baltimore City Court, Marshall and Murray won the case, and Murray attended the University of Maryland. He would graduate with a law degree in 1938. Thurgood Marshall took over the Legal Defense and Education Fund in 1939 and decided to begin focusing on segregation in public schools. Several cases were introduced in the early 1950s throughout the U.S., including Brown v. Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas. The Brown case, along with 4 other cases from South Carolina, Virginia, the District of Columbia, and Delaware, would be combined by the Supreme Court as Brown v. Board of Education in October of 1952. All of the cases called for the school districts to change their policies on racial segregation. The Brown v. Board of Education case was the argument that all public schools should allow both blacks and whites to attend school together. It wasn't fair that whites received a better education just because of their skin color. The Supreme Court did not come to a solution by the end of their term in June 1953 and agreed to rehear the case in December of the same year. During that time, Chief Justice Fred Vinson passed away and was replaced on the court by Earl Warren from California. Chief Justice Warren was able to bring a compromise among the court, allowing for a unanimous decision in favor of Brown and the other plaintiffs. Segregation in public schools was declared unconstitutional. On May 14, 1954, Chief Justice Warren delivered the opinion of the court, quote, "We conclude that in the field of public education, the doctrine of separate but equal has no place." Separate educational facilities are inherently unequal.
I remember the exact moment where I was sitting in the 11th grade. I remember the principal rang the bell to tell us in so many words that the Supreme Court had just declared schools like the ones in which we were sitting unconstitutional. The whole school sprang up. Teachers, some of whom had PhDs, broke down and cried. It was as if they never believed that this would happen.
Author Ralph Ellison said, "The court has recognized our human psychological complexity and citizenship. What a wonderful world of possibilities are unfolded for the children." The Supreme Court decision was the beginning of a revolution.
Segregation in the United States lasted many years and is arguably still occurring. There has been so much conflict surrounding the discrimination of blacks. In the 19th and 20th centuries, blacks were never treated fairly in our nation. There were many compromises to this conflict, but the first one that really made a difference in starting to end segregation was the Brown v. Board of Education Supreme Court decision. This case made it illegal to separate blacks and whites in public schools. This was a compromise to the conflict, but only one step in ending segregation. It took many years after the Brown v. Board of Education court case for segregation in public schools to fully be outlawed and addressed. We have made such a difference in segregation since the Brown v. Board of Education court decision. It was a real compromise that changed the way we live today. Without it, segregation of blacks and whites would possibly still be taking place today.